So what this is when you're transferring goods from one country to another, and they're generally for businesses that are either entirely owned or have a significant influence over. Sometimes it's 50%, sometimes it's less than that, sometimes it's 25% or something like that. But basically, it's that these transfer prices, everybody wants them to be done at an arm's length. In other words, an arm's length transaction. In other words, that it's a fair price. And the reason why countries generally like that is that everybody gets their fair share of taxes and all this other stuff that goes along with it. So when it comes to transfer pricing, there's a few different ways you can do it, but one of the things is you need to document it. And oftentimes, even if you do have, there are ways to try to get around taxes, but there's also governments aren't stupid, and they will oftentimes find ways around any income tax thing here. But anyway, let's go ahead and go through this. Okay. Cost-based transfer pricing. About 41% of the people of the companies that do this kind of transfer pricing, 41% of them will do cost-based. And basically, they're usually cost plus. And have they talked about this in other classes about the problems with cost plus pricing? Cost plus means you take the costs, whatever they are, and you add a profit to it. And it sounds, oh, okay, well, that's, that sounds reasonable. Okay, 10%, 20%, whatever it is. The problem is, how would a company that's on a cost plus basis, how would they increase their revenue? By increasing their probably, but costs. So if they're on a cost plus, how do you increase that? Would you rather have 10% of 100 million or 10% of 120 million? Well, you don't have 10% of 120 million. So the problem with cost plus is a lot of times these costs get inflated. There is no incentive to curb the costs if it's cost plus. Now, military contracts used to be like that. I don't know, maybe still are, but military contracts used to be cost plus. And so, if an airplane goes, instead of being a $3 billion program, make it into a $5 billion program. You're just going to make more money. So anyway, cost plus has always got a problem with it and built in, and that is that it doesn't control costs. In fact, it encourages higher costs. But 41% of the companies surveyed use it. Market-based pricing. If there's a market, the idea is that you use it. And if there is a market, it really helps that everything be fair, that you can actually document what these prices, what the prices that they're going for, what they're selling for, if there's an active market in it. And it also helps, everything to be at an arm's length if they use market-based pricing. A lot of companies will do market-based pricing. They'll also, when I worked at, actually when I worked at Navistar and US Steel, they both had policies that they would buy, that the buyers could use either the stuff that they made themselves or from somebody else. So they really made their own company, have to compete with outsiders. And it caused a little bit of friction in both places, but basically it's saying, like, if you're if you had a place that that's making pistons and you're making engines, you can buy those pistons from somebody else. Just because you're making the pistons doesn't mean you have to buy them from your own company. US Steel did that too. They can buy steel whatever they want to roll it. Just get into it. But there's two different things in steel. They make steel and then they roll it. And there's a rolling side that makes it into something you can actually use. Making steel, it comes out in 40-foot slabs that weigh 40,000 pounds that you can't really do anything with. But when they roll it, then you can actually do something with it. So the rolling side of it, they could buy steel from anybody. And that was part of this kind of market-based thing that, hey, not only will we pay the market price for the stuff, but we'll also buy from somebody else if you don't sell it to us for the market price. And the negotiated price. And the negotiated price is kind of what it says. They negotiate for the price of what it's going to be. And, a lot of times they'll use some of these other things in here, cost plus or market-based pricing and all that kind of stuff when they're doing the negotiations. But so negotiated prices are also, they're probably second best after market pricing. And a lot of times, it could be difficult to figure out, exactly what the negotiated prices are for. Are they to make it more profitable in one country compared to another, and so on and so forth. Okay, let's do a problem or two. The Gallant Company. This is a subsidiary of Ken Force Company. Gallant has the following data for goods that are being transferred and sold to the U.S. parent company. Okay, let's calculate the price for each one. Cost-based transfer pricing. What would we use? Well, yep. So we'd use a cost, which is $80, plus normal markup is 30% of cost, 0.30 times 80. 0.3 times 80, 24? Yes, 24. That'd be 104, I think. You guys gotta check my math on that. Is 0.3 times 80 is 24, right? Yeah. All right. So this would be our price for a cost-based trade. Market price is a little bit easier. Market price would be what? Market price. And that can be, you can actually go through some data and stuff to try to find out what the market price is for stuff. But oftentimes, if there's an active market for something or similar items, a lot of times you can get that. Negotiated price. Which one? Well, it looks like they negotiated a markup of 20% of the cost. So it's kind of like this one here. So it's cost plus 20%. That does not equal 96. Thank you. And so that would be 96. And by the way, you say, you need to document that stuff. You say, why do you need to document that? Because taxing people will want to see it. Many countries, they will ask for the documentation you have on how you came up with a price. And almost all of them say it has to be at arm's length. In other words, it has to be similar to what, if these companies were not joined at the hip, what would they be charging each other? Okay. Let's do the other one. It's a little bit different. Yeah. Normal markup's 20. 7, so was that 42? And again, the market price is simply what we have given to us. And negotiated markup is, it could be a negotiated price just, without dealing with the cost, but I just put that in there just because it's the idea behind it. That, hey, we want to that's 30, it's $3.50, right? So it's 38.50, I think. You want to check that. So those are kind of the three pricing models that we're going to deal with. Okay. Let's see here. Actually, there's quite a bit of stuff in this. Okay, cost-based methods. Cost-based methods are important. Cost-based methods when the following are important. Differentials in income tax, like we just talked about. Meta and Apple paying 0% income tax. Well, that's a big incentive. So this kind of a cost-based method would be good for that. And especially trying to shift income from one country to another, you try to shift it to countries that have a lower income tax. Minimization of import duties or even tariffs. Import duties, those would be, you can negotiate down the price. They're generally, those will be at the whatever price is negotiated, whatever is brought into with the claimed value is subject to these import duties. So if you reduce the price, now this is going to make the subsidiary less profitable. If you reduce the price, you can reduce the import duties. And what like these like tariff wars we have going on. If you're getting hit with a 20% tariff, what do? You try to reduce. You can't change the tariff. You can actually ask to do, but let's say if you can't change it, what do? The only thing you can change is the price. So if you're importing something from a subsidiary, you change the price of it, lower it, then that lowers your tariffs and yeah, duties. Duties are a little bit different. We'll talk about those in a minute. And if there's restriction on profit repatriation, you can also get cash out of a subsidiary without going through the process of repatriation of the profits. Apple, I don't know if they still do. In their Irish subsidiary, Apple had something like 300 and some billion dollars in cash that they wanted to bring to the United States. Well, guess what? They're paying zero taxes. You bring it to the United States, and we know what happens. They paid zero taxes with their foreign tax credit. It's zero. They're going to get hit with the full 20 whatever percent for corporate taxes in the United States. So I'm not sure how that actually worked out, but that's the repatriation of the profits, and that was a big problem. That Apple needed the money for their US market, but they also didn't want to pay 20% of 300 billion, which would be a lot. Okay. Market-based methods. Um, if you have local partners, if you don't have a controlling interest, and you have local partners, or even if you do have a controlling interest and you have local partners, then the market-based ones are probably going to be the ones you want to do. Those are the most um, the best arm length transactions you can have are the market-based ones. I don't know if they still have India used to have it wasn't that they didn't have they didn't prohibit it, but there was no law that allowed foreign investors to directly invest in businesses in India. You had to team up with somebody. You couldn't just go in there and say, "Hey, we're Ford Motor Company. We want to come into India." You got to find somebody in India who is local, because they're the ones that the government's going to be dealing with. They said, no, we're not going to be dealing with somebody sitting in Detroit. We're going to it has to be somebody who actually lives here, has to be and is a citizen. You have to team up with them or their or a company that's already local. So you have these companies that they have to have they cannot have 100% ownership. They have to have somebody else own it. And for those companies, the market-based ones are going to be, because it has to be fair to the people who are not the majority owner, or the ones that are getting having stuff transferred to them. Okay, here's another problems they have though. If you don't get this right, notice that the transfer pricing, while it's all the same company, oftentimes the subsidiaries will have they'll be run their own way. And they'll have, profits and everything else. They may have profit sharing, they may have bonuses and all that kind of stuff that it gives. So if you say, okay, we have these big tariffs in the United States now. We have to reduce the price that you're selling this to us. No longer $50. Now we got to put it down to 40 because we're trying to reduce these 20% tariffs. The problem with that is it makes that foreign subsidiary less profitable, and that causes big problems. Because the business itself is based on profits in that country. And a lot of times these foreign subsidiaries, they'll be doing their own books and everything else. So if you just say, well, we're taking out, 20% of your cash inflows, it doesn't always go over well. Okay. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, let's see here. Profit maximization. Let's go to the next page. By the way, this is a short chapter. It's a short chapter. There's the actual doing of this stuff in real life is actually very complex, but what we're doing is cost minimization and profit maximization. If you've been in you guys have operational management classes? Okay, they'll probably tell you those are the same thing. That's the same ringtone I have. No, you just reminded me I gotta turn mine on. Yeah, so and in business we always try to maximize profit. So profit maximization and cost minimization, they'll generally say that those go hand in hand, even though what they're basically saying is that you can't change the revenue. That you can't the revenue is not going to change. And if you're importing stuff, there is a static amount of cost that you have to deal with. So if you can minimize those costs, you're going to maximize profit. Okay, discretionary transfer pricing. This is one of those things that it's not so bad the companies do it. It's to the extent, almost all companies do it to some extent. And I know that they talk about like the U.S. tariffs and that. If you want to see something ugly, look at all the country, look at the tariff rules for all these different countries. Because when I worked at U.S. Steel and when I worked at Navistar especially, it was pretty crazy. The amount of tariffs and stuff that we would have. If we'd bring an engine in from you Europe somewhere for a truck, and you'd have to pay this big tariff on. My biggest auditing fine was a $500,000 fine, and it was real cash. It was a cash $500,000 fine. It wasn't theoretical, and it was because we had imported some engines, and I think they came from England. They went through Canada. I want to say something like that. It was some strange thing. Anyway, it went through Canada, came, and we got hit with a tariff on them. Anyway, we sold those same trucks out of country, and when you sell it back, you can then reclaim the tariff. So if an engine came in, you get hit with a tariff. When you sold the truck out with the engine in it, you could reclaim it back, and that's one of the things that they had basically stopped doing. It didn't happen all that often, but there's still $500,000, 500,000 in cash. It was just sitting there that we just had to file for. But anyway, so these can be, really big things, but it's strange, like going through from country to country, what Canada gets charged and the U.S. gets charged and Mexico, even though we're in the free trade and all that stuff, and around the world, though, they have different countries will have different tariffs and duties and all that kind of stuff, and it's a mess. In good times, it's a mess. Now it's really a mess, but in good times, it's a mess. Okay. We just talked about shifting the minimum cost by shifting profits to a lower tax jurisdiction, like Ireland. Transfer pricing may also be used to avoid withholding tax on dividends. Okay, this is something that is mostly from other countries. They tax dividends directly, and kind of like withholding tax we have for your payroll here, they will take out withholding tax for dividends. You have to pay a certain amount, and they'll withhold them. And we'll see how that works out later on here. But the withholding tax is one of those things that they will often try to avoid, and there are ways to do it. Okay. Okay, let's go ahead and go down here. Let's go to number 3. Unicorp owns a subsidiary in France. Every year, the subsidiary pays a dividend to Unicorp of approximately 200,000 US dollars. The dividends, it has withholding tax in France of 20% rate. Below is the sales data for Unicorp. How can Unicorp avoid paying the dividend withholding taxes and repatriating? Oh no, and by manipulating that subsidiary's transfer price. You're getting paid about 200,000 a year. So this foreign subsidiary, is it cold in here? Or is that just me? Oh. Okay. Well, I'm getting old. Like being at the visiting mom and dad, their house is always like 95 degrees. They're all bundled up. All right. So every year subsidiary pays, so $200,000. And France says, okay, you have to pay 20% tax on that, so we'll take 20% of the dividends. All right, what could Unicorp do to avoid paying that 20% rate? First of all, they have to stop getting paid in dividends. Yes, what they could do is lower the price that they are paying for these goods. So how much would, if they're planning on using the same 200,000 of dividends, how would you adjust the price? Assuming everything stays, the same, the units produced and the cost and all that. What would you change the price to? One more time? Well, so here's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get $200,000 into the US without calling it a dividend. And you're right, we're going to reduce the market price. So if we want this 200,000, and we are going, yeah, the cost, the cost isn't initially going to come into play, but it will in a second here when we talk about some of the drawbacks to it. What am I doing here? Oh, here we go. So we need to get $200,000 out and not pay the dividend tax, the withholding tax. What do we have to change the price to? Assuming that we're going to have 50,000 units in the following year too. We're trying, yeah, we're going to try to pull $200,000 out of this. So we got to reduce the price. How would we do it? What would the market price have to be? I shouldn't say the market price. What would the new price that we would, you know, set? Yep. Yeah, exactly. We had to pull out $4 out of it. So it looked like this. You know, we have $200,000, and that's over. Oops. Let me zoom in here. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So we have 50,000 units. $200,000 divided by 50,000 units. So we're going to have to pull out $4. So instead of paying $31, we would be paying yes. So currently 31. Oops. Minus the $4 reduction. To 27. So this would be our new price. Currently has a T in it, by the way. Write that down. So this would be our price that we would now notice what happens. We actually reduce the amount of what we're going to pay them by 200,000. So we got our 200,000. There is no 20% dividends tax. So we're pretty smart. What are some of the risks in doing this? It could be, yeah. So we had so part of the problem with this is what? Yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah. So this, before it was 31 and the cost was 25. Oops, we'll call this the old price. And the new price is 30. No, it's not. It's 27 minus 25. So our margin for each of these will be, it used to be 6, now it's 2. And what's the problem with that? There is a problem with that. Yeah, they're not as profitable, and it could even be that they're going to have losses on it. And two, you got to realize the people there, they might be getting bonuses and so on based on how profitable they are. And they're not going to be happy. uh, because now they're only making $2. And again, it could be enough. This is just a margin. This has nothing to do with what they're paying for rent and everything else. So it could be that they are not only not making profits for profit sharing and things like that, but it could be that they're actually losing money. They're not, it's not sustainable. So what else could be a problem? I don't know what France's taxing uh, agency is called, but are they a bunch of idiots? No, they'll know exactly what's going on. They see this. Okay, you stop getting dividends and you actually pulled this out. So one of the things that is you can run into a problem of is unless you have a documentation as to a reason why you're doing this, it's very difficult. And not only will you end up paying the taxes, you probably end up paying a penalty also. The money that you thought you were saving, you're going to have to blow on lawyers and everything else, and then also you're going to have to pay it anyways, plus penalties and so on. I can't tell you how many times I've seen tax stuff blow up like that, where someone thought they were clever. Wow, look at this. Oh, what? And then all of a sudden they're in court, all of a sudden they're getting taxes, all of a sudden they're they're in penalties and everything else. Anyway, so there are definitely risks in it. Risks of morale for the subsidiary, risks of uh, the French government saying, look, we know exactly what you did and we don't like it, and here's the bill. So some of the stuff you have to be somewhat careful with. Another thing they could do if they didn't want to do that, they could also levy um, tariffs on the goods that are being sold. you know, okay, we're going to level a $4 tariff on the goods being sold. There you go. Hope it was worth it. And the people in the plant are still mad. So anyway, um, yeah. So while it sounds really good, like okay, we're just going to use the law in our favor. We're going to manipulate the prices and so forth. The problem you have in this case, the big problem is the morale of the subsidiary. Did I spawn it? I don't know. And also that you could also um, I don't know what their revenue service is. It could be France's revenue service could also be. Those are big problems. And you could also run out of room. And you could also be hit with tariffs or duties. For 1 iron tariff? What things tariffs are to taxing? Tariffs are taxing the government or we'll forget about that now. Oh, wait a minute, they go too far? There we are. I'm back. Okay, so this is it. So yeah, so these are these are probably the biggest things you have to worry about. And again, these last two, while the morale is, it can be very serious, companies do all kinds of things not to destroy morale for people in their companies. You also, it might be a lot of work for nothing. The revenue service comes and says, no, you're avoiding taxes. You're decreasing their margin by 60% or whatever. Or they can just simply slap it, tariffs or duties on it if they don't want to go through the courts. Okay. Tariffs and duties. Tariffs are taxes the government imposed on goods imported from another country. In contrast, duties are taxes imposed on goods imported, local goods, and interstate transactions. If you look at it, a lot of times they'll be like things like gasoline and things like that. They'll have duties on them. Come from one state to another. So tariffs are generally paid to the federal government. Duties can be paid to the federal government. They can also be paid to states. And these are some of the reasons they have for it, the common reasons. And this last one here seems to be the center stage one nowadays. We put big tariffs on other countries, and then they put big tariffs on us, and then we put bigger tariffs on them. They put bigger tariffs on us, and then everybody calms down and goes back to where it was. But anyway, so tariffs and duties are often used for political measures, and to some extent, it's good in that they will protect the market until it grows or something like that. But again, there's no country that's clean with those. They always have their pet things that they want to keep making themselves and keep other countries out and so on. Okay. We can be a little bit on this. Oh, anti-dumping tariffs and duties. Anti-dumping, what is that? Dumping is when, oftentimes it's when there's overproduction in a certain market. Like let's say they're making too much steel in some other country. They're making too much steel in Korea. Korea has a really big steel industry. They're making too much steel in Korea. What do? They have all this excess steel. They don't want to mess up their local market, right? So they take this excess steel and they dump it. They say, okay, we want to keep the local prices high enough that we can produce it. We have all this excess steel. We'll ship it to some place and just dump it. Will ruin their market, whatever it was. And so that is, that's what dumping is. Dumping is when there's usually overproduction in a market. It could be for anything. It could be for, wheat. There was a big thing years ago that U.S. farmers, they had a big wheat yield and they were almost giving away, wheat around the world, and it was really causing havoc in their markets because, they had their local people making wheat, and all of a sudden they got dumped on, huge amounts of U.S. wheat came flying in from someplace, and all of a sudden that their market is, whereas in the U.S. it was, pretty much normal. So anyway, anti-dumping tariffs. So these are tariffs that are charged on it, and the idea is that those tariffs will have to be passed on, and that it will sort of save the market. So okay, let's say it's 20% below what wheat should be. When it comes in, we're going to charge it 20% or whatever it'll take to make it up to 20%, and that will stabilize the prices. It will help to even the field, shall we say. There's not going to be any advantage to to selling this wheat in the market. Okay. All right, let's go to all right, comparable methods for assigning a transfer site price. I stupidly thought I was going to get done with this in the first hour. Stupid. All right. Comparable uncontrolled price method. Okay, the uncontrolled price method is basically when you, it kind of is what it says. It's when you don't control it, the market controls it. There's kind of a fiction that people will sometimes say is that, if you make something, you can sell it for whatever you want. You set the price, right? You can, but if nobody buys it, it's not a market price. If I try selling this pen for $30, no one's going to buy it. That's not really a market. So the idea that you can, that if you make something or whatever, you can control the price is really not exactly true. You can control the price given, supply demand rules. Okay. So the arm's length transaction, this is kind of the one that most would, this is one they kind of go for, both governments and businesses and the subsidiaries and things like that. ABC company sells mufflers to a subsidiary in Canada. ABC company also sells mufflers in Canada to various other related auto stores. Well, compare it to. Okay, so they sell it for $115 to other stores. So what do you sell it to your subsidiary? You sell it to for the same $115. That's the price that the other stores are selling it for. That's the price you sell it to your subsidiary to. I think I came up with this example and it's wrong. It's Canada makes more mufflers than any place in the world. Did you guys know that? You don't know. It'll be on the test. But no. It's something stupid I would do, but no, it's not. It won't be on the test. But no, Canada, it's one of those weird things. It's a niche market. Canada makes mufflers for every place on the planet. Anyway, so if we were selling mufflers to Canada, which would be tough to do, but if we sell them for 115 to other places, we'd say, look, this is our price. We charge other places, so there's a price you guys are going to have to pay for it. And again, that would make it so that subsidiary, they can still be profitable to be profitable compared to the other companies that are up there. Okay. The resale price method. This goes by what the typical markup is and the typical selling price. The typical markup for mufflers in Canada is 25%. So that's how much of the selling price is profit. So they sell mufflers in Canada for 160. That's usually what people up there charge for mufflers. And they usually have a profit of, the selling price is 25%. So what do they pay for it? 120. And again, that's if it's based on, if it's based on the markup is based on the selling price. So 25% of the selling price. If it was 20% of the cost, you'd have to figure out what the cost is. Here's a question for you guys. You guys are all accounting majors. What would be the markup on cost if the markup on the selling price was 25%? What would the markup on the cost be? So basically what they're saying is, so this is the markup. So the cost would have been, so this would have been the calculated cost we have anyway. You know, this is what we would sell it to them. Our selling price to them would be their cost, 120. What would be the markup on the cost? Well, to get to 160. Because they could tell us you two different ways. What's the markup on the selling price? So they did in this one. They could also be, what is the markup on the cost? And the reason they did selling price on this one is because they didn't give you the cost. What would have to be the markup on the cost to get to 160?
To get to 160 from 120.
Yeah. Yeah, about a third. Yep. 33%. Yeah, so the markup on the cost to get up to 160 would be 160 time plus, maybe it look like this. Cost is 120. Oops, that's not the dollar amount. Times. Is someone tapping on the window? Yeah. Yeah. In Windows, they can actually amplify sound. You know, if you clap, whatever, it sounds so. But coming off of it, it's a big, okay, you can actually hear more of it. Okay, so the markup here is $40. So this would be 40 divided by 120. And that would equal 0.333 going on forever. So 120, oops, plus. And it'll be a little bit off because of rounding, but be pretty close to 160. So this would be the markup on cost. And again, we couldn't do that on here because they didn't tell us what the cost was. So the cost is kind of calculated. Okay, cost plus. I already got this one filled in. Didn't yeah. This one's called cost plus, or also known as your teacher's an idiot, and put the answer in. Let's go with that one. Your teacher's an idiot, put the answer in. or cost plus, either one. But anyway, but this idea is the same. If the cost was $90 to make it and you're selling it to, up into Canada, if the 30% is, so this is what you sell it to them for, 117. Okay. So those are the three methods you're gonna get. Comparable, which is basically market, resale method, and your teacher's an idiot, also called cost plus. Okay, problem one. If an imported item is unique and only can be used as part of a larger product, which transfer pricing method is appropriate? So it's unique. And it can only be used as a, whatever. You're making I don't know, a giant cement mixer, and this is some kind of a control board or something that goes into it. Which one of those is probably going to be used? Is there probably going to be a market for that? I mean, are you going to be able to go and say, okay, I want a control unit for a giant cement mixer? You know, what brands do you have? I mean, it's probably not going to be there. So let's say someone's making the board for the computer board for it, and it can only be used in the cement mixer thing. Which one are you probably going to use? There probably isn't going to be an A. There's not going to be a comparable. You're not going to sell these cement mixer boards to a bunch of different people. If it's unique to this one cement mixer, let's say. And the resale price one, you'll notice that usually means that there's some kind of a market. They're selling them for 160. So it's not really like you can compare it and say, okay, there's a market here. You're probably going to end up with cost plus just because there isn't really a market you can point at and say, this one means that there's a market. You're selling it to different places up in Canada for 115. This one also says there's a market. They're selling them and their typical markup is 25%. If they're only selling it to one place, if they only have one thing, and maybe it probably is the parent company, they probably have to use the cost point. Let's stop here. How much more do we have? Oh, not too much. Okay, let's stop here and then we'll say, be back at 7:04. Be back at 7:14. Oops. Okay. Okay. Let's see. Okay, let's go to problem 2. Okay, they make a helicopter right here. They sell engines to Verdi. Okay, so this is a parent company. Apparently, they're selling helicopter engines to Verdi, which is a wholly owned subsidiary. Okay, so they make engines. They bought a helicopter manufacturer in Mexico, and they're going to sell the engines too. Okay, buying information for the engines. They cost $6,000 to build. Engines are also sold to unrelated aircraft retailers in Mexico for $7,200. Unrelated aircraft retailers in Mexico typically sell engines for $10,000, and unrelated. They couldn't put this all in one. These are all the same thing. So the unrelated aircraft, they typically have a similar engines with a markup of 22%. Forester sells the engines domestically with a 25% markup on cost. Okay. Comparable uncontrolled price method would be which one? Which would be? And they say the uncontrolled price because whatever they're selling it for, they actually, again, there's this myth that you can sell it for whatever you want. The truth is, if you make the price too high, you're not going to sell any. So, when they talk about the unrelated price, they're really talking about what's the normal selling price of it, not necessarily that you control that. I'm sure if they could sell these engines for 17,200, they would, but they sell them unrelated to aircraft retailers in Mexico for 7,200. They cost 6,000, and the unrelated retailers typically sell these engines for 10,000. Okay, so going back down here, which one is going to be the uncomparable? It's going to be uncontrolled price method. Go back up here to this one. So ABC also sells mufflers in Canada, unrelated, out of source for 115. Yep. Actually, just be the 7,200. Oops, too much. I got 72,000. It'd just be the 7,200. That's what they sell it to other people for. That's what they're going to sell it for. Now, remember, this is the parent company selling it to the company that's making the helicopters in Mexico. Now, the company in Mexico is also going to, put it in helicopters and obviously sell it for more money than that. Now, the resale price method, this is, yet other companies are selling similar items and they're selling them for 10,000. So they typically sell these for the engines for $10,000. They typically sell engines for a markup of 22%. Yep. So they're going to resell it. The resale is, oops, let's try that again. $10,000 minus the markup on sales. Oops, wrong zero. It's an O. Okay, so 10,000 minus 2,200.
7,800.
Yep. All right, so comparable uncontrolled. Cost plus would be what? The cost was what? Oops. They actually gave us the cost of this one. Yep. So the US company is making these for $6,000 plus, again, this is on cost. $25. So their standard usual markup on is 25%. Yep. So the cost plus would be 7,500. Which would be probably the most appropriate transfer price. This is kind of a judgment call. Oops, don't do that. Don't do that. Well, yeah, here's the thing. The comparable uncontrolled price is 7,200. That's probably the most accurate market one. And two, you got to remember, assuming there's competition in this field, that if this helicopter company did not make, or did not use our engines, they could probably buy something similar for 7,200, I would assume. You know, if that's what they're being sold to other places for. The resale method was probably not, I probably wouldn't put as much stock in that, because why? It's showing a cost of 7,800. They're actually selling it to them for 7,200. So that probably means there's other engines mixed into that. You know, the typical markup that probably has other than the ones that we're selling. Because our, you know, the uncontrolled cost that we're selling it to them, the other ones are 7,200. I would say probably a comparable uncontrolled method. The cost plus might be also appropriate because that is what we're selling them in the domestic market. And you know, it'd be somewhat reasonable to say, okay, we're going to charge the same thing for everybody else here. But probably the most accurate, I would say this one is probably the one. And again, if you wanted to say, okay, you know, that you could definitely make the case for the cost plus one, saying, look at this, this is what we sell it for in the United States. So we're going to sell it for the same thing in Mexico, even though the market might be different. Okay, the last one. We saved the last one for last because it's the one that's the most pain in the butt. Okay. And this has to do with um, the idea that, you know, simply looking at the income tax may not always give you the best solution. So let's look at the income tax rate. The Singapore income tax is 15% and the US income tax is 21. Where would you want to recognize theoretically the most profit? In Singapore or in the US? Yeah, yeah, it's cheaper, right? I mean, if you know, you make $100 in US dollars in Singapore, you're going to pay $15. You make it in the United States, you're going to pay 20. Okay, so you know, a reasonable, just to get the tax rates, you'd say, okay, it makes sense that we would actually try to get as much income recognized in Singapore as we can. Okay, so they have these drones they're making, and there's, I think, the part that goes into them. The electronic control units. They cost $20 to produce and $5 to ship. Tyler uses control units to produce remote control drones that it sells in the United States to US retailers, excuse me, for $100. Not including the electronic control unit, the other manufacturing costs are $35. Okay. I'm assuming this is a wholly owned subsidiary. US import duty, 25%. Okay. So let's do the easy one first. Singapore, they're going to sell them to us. Here's the transfer price, $30. Let's do that. Okay. So it's $30 is our selling price. What cost do we have for Singapore? Yep. Oh, no, don't do that. And don't do that. There we go. Okay, so the taxable income would have been $5. I should probably just say taxable income. Singapore tax rate is 15%. So how much taxes will we pay in Singapore? $5 times. I don't have enough room here. You know what? I'm gonna move this over, right? It's not, yeah, because that's not under the US. Okay, so this would be what, 75 cents? Minus, we have to pay this in. So our net income for Singapore would be uh, four. Yep. Okay. All right, let's go to the US. So US, we have a selling price of $100. They're selling it to us for 30. Those two 30s are the same, by the way. Import duty. So we have to pay 25% on this when it comes into our country. So we're gonna pay, oops, $30. It's 750. Positive or negative? Money coming in or going out? Negative. Other costs. Other costs. 35. US taxable income is some 100. Oops. 27.50. Okay, and our tax rate is 21%. So we round up or round down? Yeah, I rounded up on this one, so I'll assume that we round up. Yeah, $5.77.5. We don't even have cents anymore. Why we? All right, so 5.78. 21.73. There we go. So these two together would be our total net income. I'm gonna put total over here. Oops. Yep, like 25.98. I got 25.97. I'm here. Oh, I put what I got right now. 25.98. Price changed. It'll be somewhere around there. All right, so oops. Let's make it red. So this will be our total income per item. Okay, now notice what we did down here. Change the transfer price from 30 to 40. Why are we doing that? Most likely, looking back up here, why are we doing that? Anyone? I'm sorry? It definitely this showing the whole thing. Yes, it is to increase the profit by taking advantage of Singapore's taxes. So, okay, I tell you what, let's make Singapore more profitable. Pay the taxes in Singapore, we don't pay it in the US, we're going to save 6% on the taxes. Let's make these pay $40 Singapore, and that'll again overall we'll probably save money, right? I'm sure that was the thinking behind it anyways. So let's see how this would look. Singapore would look exactly the same, except we'd have 40. Their other costs are still 25. The taxable income is how much? Yep. And the Singapore rate is 15%, so $15 times Oops. 0.15. 225. My camera's in the way. You know what? I'm gonna move camera A. Camera E being stubborn. Okay, so this is minus 2.25. Net income is what, 12.75? Make sure you guys check that. Even on a good day, you need to check it. Okay. Coming over here. US sales price is 100. Oops, don't do that. Oops, don't do that. There you go. Import cost is $40. Import duty is $10. Other costs are 35. Oops, it's a negative. Here, because the other costs are. US taxable income is it 15 also? It is. I didn't realize that those are both the same. That's an unhappy coincidence, by the way. You know, these two don't have to be the same. Okay, US tax rate is 21%.
Uh,
310. Oh, 315, I'm sorry. Minus 315. Is it 1185? I'm sorry?
Did all this.
Yeah, what's the problem with this doing this? 2460? Yeah, this was definitely not the plan. What's the problem with this whole scheme? How come we gave more money to Singapore where the income taxes is lower, and yet we're getting less back. We're paying out more. Oh, we'll get about doing. Okay. Oops. Oops. I'll put that. I'll put 2B up later. What is it? Oh, probably the compare uncontrolled. It could be either be that or cost plus. You can make an argument for either one of them. Okay. So well, why? Why is this? Why doesn't this make sense? This doesn't. There actually is a reason why. What is it? Yeah, and that's probably why they did it, but they're paying more. This is the exact same transaction. All we're doing is changing the transfer price. This is the only thing that changed in both of them, the transfer price. And yet we got less income. We're paying out more in taxes and um, import duties and everything else. And that's what it is. It's the import duties that are causing. And again, countries aren't stupid. And so when people start, say, okay, well, we'll switch to, oh, like, if Ireland were manufacturing something, which by the way is part of the problem with doing anything with Ireland, is that you're dealing with intangibles that are completely unique. So that's part of the problem with as far as um, figuring out what kind of taxes and that to levy on them. But anyway, bringing this back into the United States, they say, okay, wait, coming from Singapore, they pay less taxes there, and that's probably why the import duty is 25%. You can put more money in whatever, but that's just going to cause the import cost to go up. Import cost means the import duty goes up. So, they got $5 extra out of the import duty on it. And that's a big reason why that doesn't pan out. And again, this is one of those things that, you can't just look at the tax rates. And so oftentimes people will look at just the tax rate. This is a tax rate. What's the tax rate? Especially if they're manufacturing something, it's almost always gets balanced out. Again, countries aren't stupid. They have people who their job is to, think about this stuff. So, two things can happen if you do that. They can ask the taxes. People can ask you for documentation on why you did it, and it needs to be documented as one of these. By the way, going back to this, these are basically the three methods that pretty much every country allows. If you're wondering why, there's actually a couple more than this, but the other ones are not as commonly used. So these are the methods that countries will allow. And if you don't use those, you're kind of opening yourself up for getting hit with taxes. So you have to have your documentation, ducks in a row when it comes to taxes. To use one of those three methods. Where's on that? Okay. All right. Well, I think I'll have to send out a test. This between this and chapters, or my chapters 8. Between this and chapter 8, it's kind of like a bunch of little stuff. Yeah. There'll definitely be one of these on there. A foreign tax deduction versus foreign tax credit. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'll get that out by tomorrow. Any questions? Okay, those of you playing along at home. Oh, I thought we were earlier than that. Been talking too much. Okay, any questions on those of you playing along at home? Do you need to see do you need to see that page? I don't know who asked it.
No, I'm okay. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, and again, that's kind of a judgment call. It probably go with either the cost plus or what they sell it to other businesses for. You know, you definitely make an argument for both of those. Okay, and because the cost is different than the cost you come up with for the calculated one from the selling price, um, it looks like there's probably other things included in that markup rather than simply the engines that they were selling. There's other things involved. Okay. All right, well, go ahead and you can turn that in, and I will send out the exam by tomorrow. I'll have it out. I'll try to send it out tonight, but by tomorrow I should have it. Any questions? All right, see you guys. And let me check off.
Have a good evening.
Bye.